Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I am Drew Dragonslayer Thomas, your host, coming to you live from both in person and online, the Norman Rockwell Museum. If you're unfamiliar with the mission of our museum, it is to illuminate the illustrative power to shape and reflect our society and to advance the enduring qualities of kindness, respect, and social equity that's portrayed in Norman Rockwell's art. Before we begin, I'd like to read our land acknowledgement. It is with great gratitude and humility that we acknowledge that we are learning, speaking, and gathering on the ancestral homelands of the Mohican people, who are the indigenous peoples of this land on which our museum was built. Despite tremendous hardship in being forced from here, today their community resides in Wisconsin and is known as the Stockbridge-Muncie community. We pay honor and respect to their ancestors past and present as we commit to building a more inclusive and equitable space for all. So I'd like to welcome you all to the first installment of our Tuesday program, Meet the Artist series, where we'll be in conversation with some of the most talented illustrators and writers of our generation, as well as Jesse Kowalski, the curator for our fantasy exhibit, Enchanted, and with you all, our audiences, both online and in person. We'd like to encourage you all to be a part of the conversation as well. And we invite you to consider any questions or comments that you might have during the duration of the program. For those of us watching online through YouTube, Zoom, Vimeo, or Facebook, feel free to leave your questions in the chat and I'll find space to bring them up. And for those of us in person, due to some last minute complications we had with the weather, please just raise your hand or make it known that you have a question. And I'll repeat your question and ask artist or Jesse the question. So we have a lot of exciting things to talk about today. We'll go ahead and jump right in. I'll go ahead and hand it off to Jesse Kowalski, the creator for our fantasy exhibit. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Yeah, Brom. He is one of the most highly regarded artists of his generation, best known for painting dark, haunting images. He began his career drawing for comic books before moving to TSR in the late 1980s, where he began painting breathtaking scenes for Dark Sun, a Dungeons & Dragons campaign set in a post-apocalyptic desert world. And following his work on D&D, he co-created a card game, painted publicity images for video games, and designed the poster for the 1999 Tim Burton film Sleepy Hollow. In 2005, he wrote his first book, The Plucker, about monsters under the bed. Since then, he's written 4 additional illustrated novels, including The Devil's Rose, Krampus the Yule Lord, and a frightening take on Peter Pan titled The Child Thief. He is set to release his latest book in September titled Slewfoot, A Tale of Witchery. Brom's painting in the exhibition, The Nightmare, evokes the final scene of an ancient pagan ritual. Brom received the prestigious Grand Master Award at the 2013 Spectrum Fantastic Art Annual, and the Nightmare painting in the exhibit won first place in imaginative realism at the 13th Annual ARC Salon in 2018. Thank you for joining us, Brom, and go ahead and take it away.
Hey, well, thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Drew. First of all, thank everybody for showing up for this. A big thank you to the Norman Rockwell Museum for having me. It's a huge honor. Norman Rockwell played a big, giant influence in me, so to be attached to that in any way is just a thrill beyond measure. We're going to start off with a real quick PowerPoint just to give you a quick background on what I've done. Give me just a minute to set this up. Okay, here goes. Wish me luck. All right. I'm going to go through this pretty quick, so we'll have more room for questions. Born bad. I was fortunate, I feel, to have lived all over the world as an Army brat. I got started in Japan. Japan was a huge influence on me, a 3-year-old with a barrage of Japanese animation, Ultraman and Godzilla. I got to live in Hawaii and Germany and all over the United States. From Japan, we went back to Alabama, so where my hometown is. My father volunteered and went to Vietnam, and I was left with a library full of dinosaurs. Charles Knight's big influence on me getting going. Here's my earlier drawings. As you can see, I've always loved monsters. This is what I've drawn my whole life. This is middle school. This was entered in the Piney Woods Art Festival, an outdoor art festival. I won nothing, but that little spot is where a bird pooped on my painting. So what are you gonna do? These are some illustrations from high school. Again, just showing you, this is what I've always loved, what I've always done. After graduating high school in Frankfurt, Germany, I moved back to Atlanta, Georgia, and I went to art school there. It was a commercial art school, 2-year school. It was not a very good school. They did not teach drawing or painting, but they did teach you how to do such things as type with pica, do a stat camera, paint with placa, use Rubylith, all things that went the way of the dodo the minute the PC was invented. But fortunately, I put together my own portfolio. 4 years doing commercial art. This is not Photoshop. This is using airbrush. That was all we had back then. It about killed me. You know, after 4 years, I had to ask myself, why am I hating this? You know, I'm finally getting to do what I always want to do. I'm being paid to do art, but it was not the macabre. It was not fancy. It was not imaginative. At the time, this was the break-in piece for me at that time. The California raisins were all the rage, and everybody wanted their product with the little arms and legs. And I remember having a dispute with the art director over whether their white foam core was cool white or warm white, and he kept making me go back and forth doing it. It was before Photoshop, so every time I had to repaint it, I ended up in a closet in tears looking at my old fantasy artwork, said, I've got to get back into this. So from there, I put together a portfolio of okay artwork and started shopping it around. I would hit the local comic conventions. These are some of my first comic jobs I got. They paid dirt, but I was so happy because I was doing imaginative work. From there, I was very fortunate to break in and get on staff at TSR Dungeons & Dragons. And it was the best education I could ever have. I worked alongside Jeff Easley and Fred Fields and Clyde Caldwell, Rob Rupel, Keith Parkinson, Larry Elmore is still around. And so I've got to learn my craft from them. I was fortunate to be attached to a Dark Sun World. So a lot of these paintings are from that particular property. And yeah, I'll go through these pretty quick. Some more game art. I left after 4 years and went back freelance. And I include this particular piece because this is Elric. Michael Moorcock's one of my favorite authors when I was in high school. I think he deserves credit for being one of the forerunners of Gothic fantasy. He's a very tragic Elric vampire figure. I was the biggest fan in high school and drew him over and over. So when I got to do an actual cover for one of his books, it was such a big moment for me. And so this is that cover. To be able to contribute to something that helped make me who I am was just amazing. Another picture of Elric. Started doing cards are really big, and card art was a great place to explore, because unlike a cover, you could really explore on a card. It didn't have to sell a whole thing, so you could do all kinds of stuff. So where I feel at TSR was an opportunity to develop my style, I feel cards were a place where I learned to find my voice. And by my voice, it was a time where I combined all the elements I loved. I loved, you know, fantasy, the macabre, the punk, fetish, and just mixing all these things together in a unique way was, you know, just, it felt so groundbreaking at the time. I had such an adrenaline rush making these paintings. I art directed this as well as did the illustrations, and had the opportunity to work with some of my favorite artists of the day. This was, I also did quite a bit of film work. This is a design for John Carter of Mars, Assassin for John Carter of Mars. It was from a version of the movie that never ended up getting made, and Ian McCabe was art director on that. Video games, huge part of my life. Played it when I first got my original PC. Myself and the family played all the time. It was, you know, a big part of, I consider, again, my family. We had Doom, original World of Warcraft covers. Probably my biggest deal to me was getting to work on the original Diablo 2 painting cover. And a quick anecdote here is on the left is the original painting. You see a hole in the skull. It was right after Columbine. And so they felt like it represented possibly a bullet. So they actually lowered the a hood on the final because they wanted to avoid any association with Columbine. Since then, I've had the opportunity to continue working with Blizzard, one of my absolute favorite clients, because you know, it's rare that you get to work on a project that you actually love the game, and this is one of the few games that, you know, has been part of my whole adult life. And here's a few paintings from it. The piece from Diablo 4, working with John Mueller as art director. I can't tell you enough how talented that team of artists are. They're the best in the world. There's, you know, 100 artists working on this canvas, and I had the opportunity to actually go down and work on site for a while, and it was, you know, an amazing experience. Now here's some various commissions from over the years. And sorry, I'm going through these fast. Most of these are on my website, so you can look at them closer. Telling tales. Near my early 30s, I burnt out on illustration. I felt like I was doing very repetitive work. People were asking me to do the same thing over and over. So I felt like the only way to get control of what I was painting was to write my own stories. And I'd always told tales since I was a kid. So I started writing books. The first book I wrote was The Plucker, and it was essentially, you know, an adult, basically a children's book for adults, I should say. It's about the, you know, when the monsters come to life from under their bed, and basically two mythologies children all have: monsters under the bed and toys being alive in the land of make-believe. And this book is about those two mythologies coming together. Doesn't go so well for the toys, I might add.
Brom, if you don't mind, we have a couple questions from the online audience.
Sure.
I just want to say, we see your questions, even though we don't ask them right away. I'm just kind of waiting for them to a good time to ask them. But from Shafi from Singapore, they ask, can you tell us about your painting process? How long does the process take you from start to finish?
We'll go into that in detail just a little bit later. I actually have some slides set up for that, and I'll let Jesse lead the way on that.
Okay.
The second book, the first two books I wrote were heavy on illustration, and a page of illustration, a page of prose. This was my second one, The Devil's Rose, which I consider a romantic Western set in hell. It's essentially about a Texas Ranger that is enlisted by the devil to track down lost souls. For me, it was really an excuse to paint undead on motorcycles. So the writer in me at some point wanted to know if I could write a book that could stand on prose alone. So the first book that I wrote that was a full novel, it was still illustrated, but it was just, it was more like 8 paintings in black and whites throughout instead of fully illustrated. It's The Child Thief, which is a dark retelling of the Peter Pan myth. And these are all books for adults, not for children, even though they play on a lot of childhood themes. The next prose novel was Krampus, and Krampus is probably my favorite novel. It's just so much fun to write. Krampus is, of course, the Christmas demon, and I dig into Norse mythology, and it's very interesting to find out how Krampus preceded Santa in mythology. And so this story was what would happen if Krampus came back to modern times and wanted to reclaim his holiday. And essentially the story follows Krampus trying to track Santa down to kill him. And it's, again, based on Norse mythology, so Santa Claus is more of an Odin-style character. This is Mrs. Claus. This is Krampus, some of his helpers. Lost Gods, another of my novels, is essentially one soul's journey through purgatory, and like the title, he has to navigate through, you know, all these various lost gods, forgotten, and just lost gods and demons. People that are fans of religious mythology would really enjoy this one. Some of the critters, the demons and gods from it.
Brom, I know you were just talking about this. Another question from our online audience is Eric Andrews asked, can you share some of your literary influences with us?
There's so many, you know, primarily, you know, when I was younger, it was Robert E. Howard with Conan. It was Edgar Rice Burroughs with John Carter of Mars. Then it was Elric, and then it was J.R. Tolkien with The Lord of the Rings, Edgar Allan Poe. And then, I discovered Stephen King, and it just completely opened up the whole world from there. Anne Rice, McCartney, Cormac, just to name a few.
Looks like another related question just came in from Scott. Was it difficult to both paint the images and write the story for your books? What was the experience like?
No, just opposite. When I was burnt out on illustration, I started writing. Just like when I was a kid and I used to read books, and then I wanted to go and illustrate the stuff I read. It was the same way. It was almost like the author and the illustrator and me were two different people, and I'd start writing, and then the illustrator would get inspired to want and go and draw all the things I'm writing. And I would discover things in the paintings that the author and me would not have thought of. And then those would go back in the story and then back and forth. So the two really fed on each other. And that's so much of what I love about words and prose. To me, that's what I love to do, creating a complete vision, so to speak. This is my latest novel, Slewfoot. It is basically a historical horror novel. It's set in colonial America in the 1600s. It's about what happens when a spirited young woman who was raised, had a pagan upbringing, is shipped off to a Puritan colony, and how she tries to navigate that treacherous and unforgiving society, who's always looking for witches and devils under every rock. Enter into this tale the devil, except in this case, he's a confused forest spirit who's trying to figure out who he is in this new world of men. And this one comes out in September.
I know we already talked about this, but a quick question that we missed that I'm also interested in is Yasmin asked, what can you tell us about working on the upcoming Diablo game?
Absolutely nothing, because I have a non-disclosure agreement.
Oh man.
Well, I don't know that much about the internals. For me, it was much more, they send me over characters, concepts that they're working on, and they ask me to bring it to life in my style. So I don't have any really good tidbits other than what I've seen. Just looks amazing. They seem to be really harkening back to what I feel is the best of all their previous games. So it's the one game I still play, so I'm very excited to see the finale. Yeah. This is the end of the slideshow. This is my studio. I would have loved to film this in the studio, but the internet's pretty bad out here. This is actually my office here. But from here, I'd like to hand it over to Jesse and Drew and let them take it.
Thank you. Really quickly, just one more question.
Oh, sure. Stop the share. Let me fix this. Okay, are we back to normal? Can you guys see?
Yeah, it looks good. It's perfect.
Sorry, Drew, go ahead.
Thank you. It's no problem. Before we move to the next section, I just want to ask from Adam, if you had to choose your favorite mythology / Norse character, what would that be and why? I'll get to you.
Oh, Lord, I hate these kind of questions. I need to think for like 10 minutes to come up with that. Norse mythology. Maybe the Valkyrie, just the idea of these people escorting the brave dead to Valhalla. I'll go with that.
All right. And we actually did have one more question. Just give me one moment. Go ahead, sir.
You worked on TRS and you worked on co-creating a card game. I was wondering if you ever thought about making a tabletop RPG based off of one of these literature literary books.
So the question was, you worked on TRS and other card games. Did you ever consider making any tabletop RPGs?
Myself, I just don't.
Based off one of your books, I'm sorry.
Oh, based on one of my books. Oh, well, that's a different scenario. Yes, I would love that. There has been talks of that. I would be thrilled to see them come to life in a game setting. Absolutely.
And we have one more question, just a moment. Yes, sir. Do you ever use human models for your human characters?
I do. I often use them for monster characters too. My process is I try to draw things from imagination first, because I feel that that's where I'm going to find something the most unique and original. But after I get the drawing going, I then either take photos or do research to make sure that I understand the structure of what I'm doing. But I rarely stick to the photo. The photo, again, is a process of understanding the structure, and then I try to put my imagination on top of that. If you look at most of the paintings, you might be able to see that there is, a certain element of true anatomy, but it's all stretched and pushed and twisted.
We do have a ton of questions, but I want to make sure that we let Jesse introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Brom, so your work is typically placed in the genre of dark fantasy, perhaps weird fantasy. I was wondering, for viewers that aren't aware, if you could describe what dark fantasy means to you.
I think it's fairly simple to me. It's just imaginative work with a macabre twist.
And what draws you to dark fantasy?
Now, that's a good question. Something I often think about, because I was born loving this stuff. I mean, it's the earliest I can remember. If you offered me a colorful bouncy ball and a skull, as a 2-year-old, I would have loved that skull. And I think there are a lot of people like that. I've never suffered any extreme trauma or went through something that twisted me and made me like this. I like this from the beginning. And it's one way to look at it. I often put this anecdote out there. If you asked a group of school-age children to draw a toaster, what a boring assignment. They would find it boring, and it would probably be boring to look at. But if you ask them to draw an evil toaster, well, immediately that's interesting. They're going to have fun doing it, and I want to see what they come up with. So I feel there's like an inherent drama in the macabre. I think we're just naturally interested in things that can bite us.
Okay, yeah, and you, as you mentioned, you grew up an army brat. You lived in Japan, Alabama, Hawaii, Germany, etc. Did you find the moves exciting, and do you think that the constant relocations had any effect on the artwork that you create now?
I absolutely loved moving around. It really fit my personality, and it did play a big role in everything, because being exposed to all these different cultures inspired my work in a big way. The other part of it too is, moving around every 3 years, it can be lonely. You have to make new friends right off and stuff. And always having art as a friend was great. If I was alone by myself, I wasn't. I had my sketchbook and I was making monsters. But also it helped me make friends, because, having this interest and this passion, I would always find other people that shared those passions. And it was an instantly, way to make friendships and bond with people.
Yeah, we got a number of questions about process, but before that, I just wanted to talk about your influences. So you've noted that your main influences are Frank Frazetta and Norman Rockwell.
Yeah.
So what is it about each artist that appeals to you?
There's so many influences, but I would list those two as the absolute key influences. It's hard for me to even put into words what Frazetta means to me. It's just so visceral, and it just hits me right in the gut. He nails everything, the lighting, the power, the visceralness, the darkness in his work even. Norman Rockwell is a little easier to explain. I mean, both of these artists, I can't even tell you when I first saw their work. I just feel like they've been with me my whole life. But with Rockwell, not only is he just the most incredible craftsman with paint, it's just beyond description of what he can do with paint, and so prolific. But he's an incredible storyteller. Even if they weren't paintings, if they were photographs, they're still incredibly intriguing. You want to know about these characters. You want to know what happened before and what after. And to me, that is the ultimate test of good illustration. You're telling the story. So so it's very natural, I think, for me to be drawn to these two guys.
Yeah, and I don't think people would associate you with Norman Rockwell, but do you have a favorite Rockwell painting?
Oh, so many. One of my favorites is him with the one with the machine gun. It shows what Rockwell can do if he wanted to go a little bit in a darker vein. I think it was for a War Bond poster, but
I think it's give him enough and on time, I think.
Yeah. gosh, I would have just loved to seen him do a hardcore fantasy painting or horror painting. Wouldn't that be incredible?
Perfect. Yeah. So if you could talk a little bit about your process. I know that uh, you mentioned that you paint oil over acrylics, which I thought was a bit odd. So if you could talk about your process and how long it takes.
Sure, I'm going to pop up this PowerPoint again real quick and go through this because I made some pictures of it. Here we go. Okay, let's see if I can get this to work. Okay, we're working. Okay, great. I'll go through this real quick. This is a process of typical painting. Every painting is a little different, but I do some quick rough thumbnails. This is example of one. From the thumbnails, I do a tight sketch. At this point, I will have tracked down my reference. In this case, I might have posed as one of these undead creatures. I think I had a young lady pose for the Valkyrie here. From there, this is where I transfer it on the board, and I do an outline on the board, and I do the acrylic underpainting. And the purpose of that is just to knock all that white out there, get the basic colors started. The acrylic saves me a lot of time because if you do oils, you build them up and you have to wait for them to dry. So the first thing is just a wash. The second step, this is still acrylic. I'm just trying to block in those key darks and lights. So when I start with the oils, I'll have this under it so I can make a big mess with the oils and not feel like I'm going to lose the structure of my painting. So from here, I start the oil painting. In this step, you can see I've painted the background and it's roughed in. Some of the other areas are roughed in, and it's going to be hard to see. But this, let's just look at the building down there. You can see where it's roughed in the second pass, it's tightened up. On this slide, look at her flesh. This is the first pass, it's roughed in. Second pass, it's tightened up. And as I go through, this is a close-up of this, it's building. I usually do 1 or 2 passes on each section, and you can see some areas are still raw and others are painted in. This is the final painting, and there's a close-up, and that's that. So I will escape out of that.
And about how long did that take for that painting?
How long did it take? An average, that was a really big painting. I think it's about 5 feet tall. So it probably took about 3 weeks from the very start to the finish. On average, paintings take, 1 to 3 weeks on average. Just depends on how complicated, how big.
There were
someone
a
asked,
few. I'm so sorry, Jesse. The audience, there's a lot of process related questions. So if I could just ask a few of those, that would be awesome. So really quickly from Jamie, they ask, how do you handle transparent oil colors like manganese blue to get better coverage?
I don't even know the name of half of my colors. I just sort of know where they are in my tray and I pick them up. But to answer his question, I usually paint fairly opaquely, but sometimes I use them as washes to go over and sort of even out colors. But it's for me, it's a very intuitive process. I don't always know what works, but I know it's not working. So I just keep kind of throwing things at it until something I feel is aesthetic comes out of the mess.
Great. And I think you touched on this. So maybe just quickly top onto the process question. I'd like to know about the early stages of the process, ideation, thumbnails, or sketches. Essentially, what happens before he gets to the canvas?
Different on every painting. Some paintings come to me just fully realized, and it's really I go right into the drawing and I draw it. Some I will spend like 10 pages of sketches trying to find it. But it once I do the drawing, I actually I'm completely traditional, so I actually transfer it by using carbon paper under the sketch to transfer it onto the board, and then we go through the process like I just showed you.
Thank you. Most of the rest of the questions are about your writing, so I don't know if you wanted to finish up about this topic, Jesse.
Yeah, sure. Let me just hit on some of the other pieces here. I wanted to talk about your painting in the exhibition, The Nightmare. When I was planning the show, that was really one of the first paintings that I said, it has to be in this exhibition. So what was the inspiration for that? And, the shoes on the ground, what happened to those people?
This is, as far as inspiration, this was a piece that sort of just came to me fully realized. And but as far as the thoughts process behind it, it's my love of just the pagan mythology. And sometimes the thought process is more visual. In other words, what components are going to make this interesting? Maybe it's just that simple. And somehow originally I was putting skulls down there instead of shoes, and I put the shoe, and it's just like it suddenly made the whole world bigger. It's like suddenly there's all these questions, these modern shoes, like where are the people? Is she all by herself? It's at the end of the earth. Is she the last earth spirit left? And man has burned down his earth, or did she eat all these people? I don't know. I like that there's questions there, and I like that it makes people want to know the story behind it. So.
Right. And something inspirational about your life is when you interviewed at TSR to work on the gaming there, that Dungeons and Dragons, that they told you were at the bottom of their list, and then they sent you home. So
Yeah,
how did you end up working there?
It's a good story. I'll try to make it quick. So I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm trying to break into fantasy art. I'm doing the commercial art. I'm sick of it. Doing these, I'm at conventions showing my barely decent fantasy portfolio around, getting lots of rejections. I go up to Dungeon Magazine, the art directors there, and I show him my portfolio, and he passes the buck. He's like, yeah, you're not quite what we're looking for, but why don't you send your work to the art liaison at TSR, at Dungeons & Dragons? So I send my slides off, don't hear anything. Why not? I'm a 24-year-old kid full of snot. So I get on the phone and I call him and I'm like, hey, did you get my slides? Don't you love them? Why don't you love them? And the lady's like, oh yeah, this is nice. Might be some work from you down the road or something. But she accidentally mentioned they were looking for a staff artist. And so I'm just like, all hands. I'm like, that's me. No, I'm right for this job. Trust me. She's like, no, there's other people interviewing, whatever. I invite myself up. I just say, I'm going to come show you my portfolio. I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. This is Wisconsin. I get on a plane and I show up here, and they're so nice. They let me in, and I show my portfolio. The artists all have nice things to say. The art directors all have nice, encouraging things to say. But at the end of the day, the lead art director, he pulls me aside. He said, look, kid, we've got 11 people applying for this job, and of those 11, you're number 11. So I finally get the message, right? So I tuck my tail between my legs and I go back to Atlanta. But again, I'm so full of snot at that age, and I have to get into fantasy art. It's just, it's what I have to be. So in that time, there wasn't an internet, and the only way to work in fantasy, the best jobs were doing book covers. So I'm saying, my wife and I are in Atlanta, let's go to New York City. I'm going to, one way or the other, I'm going to get my foot in the door. So we go up and we rent an apartment. We have no jobs lined up, anything. We go back to Atlanta. We pack up the U-Haul. It's out in the front. It's completely ready to go. We're going to New York to see what can happen. No exaggeration. There's a few items left in the apartment. The phone's one of them, because I'm about to call my parents and tell them we're heading to New York. The phone rings. It's TSR. And he goes, hey, are you by chance still interested in that job? And I'm like, huh? Yeah, well, heck yeah. And he goes, oh, great. Because the other 10 people that we were considering did not want to move to a small town in Wisconsin, so you can have the gig. Then he goes, now, I know you probably have a lot of work you have to finish up and get out of your lease and stuff. He goes, how many months will it take you to get up here? And I look out the window at the U-Haul and I say, I can be there in 8 hours. And I was.
That's great. So moving on to your books, in 2005, you released The Plucker, which is about creatures under your bed, as you mentioned. Was that a fear of yours growing up? And how eager were publishers to print your book?
It was a fear growing. It's still a fear. I still think something's going to grab my ankle when I get out of my bed. As a matter of fact, I know there's critters under my bed. Yeah, as I mentioned, I played on those mythologies of toys coming to life and monsters under the bed. But I put this book together, and it was a book, a children's book for adults. It was not for kids. And when I was pitching it, I got rejection after rejection. Publishers didn't know what to do with it. At that time, it didn't fit in their little boxes. We don't do illustrated books for adults, especially with this kind of twisted material. So I got several rejections before before Abrams took a chance on it. And I'm very grateful that they did. And if I can add to that note, because I want this to be encouraging to anybody out there that's struggling to do something unique, or even to break into areas they're not completely comfortable with. Several years later, when I wrote my first prose novel, The Child Thief, it was a similar scenario. I took that book around and I got, several rejections, 5 or 6 different publishers that just didn't feel the material was up for snuff or weren't comfortable with it. And fortunately, Diana Gill, my editor at HarperCollins, loved it, but she said, you got a lot of work to do on this. So, I went to school basically reading everything I could in writing, and it ended up, doing quite well. People seem to love it. So sometimes persistence, hard work, and finding the right match between what you're trying to do and the publisher. Of course, this
actually,
this
great.
Self-published, so it's even, there's a whole new avenue available.
That actually answered a lot of the questions about your writing here, but there are a couple that I'd like to ask from Raphael. How much research goes into writing these books?
So much for me, because I love the mythology behind them. Even the Peter Pan story, I wasn't content with just reading the Peter Pan material. I wanted to know all the mythology that, James Barrie got Peter Pan from, and then work that into it, and Krampus as well. I can't imagine how much work it was before the internet, because at least with the internet, you can just dig and dig and dig and find stuff. But in the last novel I did, Sleuthfoot, was a historical novel, and it was the hardest novel of all of them to write, because in the fantasy kind of worlds, you can fudge, and mythology, you can kind of manipulate things. But when you're writing in a historical context, people will, you need to get it right, or somebody's going to call you out.
Thank you. And I just wanted to double check. Does anybody in person have a question? Oh, yeah. Lady in the back, and then we'll do you. Okay, go ahead. Yes.
You said J.R.R. Tolkien was one of your influences. Who would you say is one of your favorite Lord of the Rings characters?
Okay. Did you hear that?
I didn't.
He asked, J.R.R. Tolkien is one of your influences. Who would you say is one of your favorite Lord of the Rings characters?
Gollum. Definitely Gollum. Yeah.
That was a good question. All right. Yep.
This kind of goes back to the process a bit. Brom mentioned that he kind of goes back to the original sketch instead of going to reference to actually paint. So I was wondering if he keeps up like reference photos right there and goes back to some of these pieces to be kind of like shove them aside.
She wanted to ask, because you mentioned about using your references when painting, do you go back and forth from your references, or do you shove them to the side?
I definitely go back and forth, but she makes a really good point. There is a time to put them aside, especially a photographer with photographs. If you become a slave to the photograph, it really stiffens the painting, and so it's always a tightrope trying to figure out how much to pay attention to and how much to just make it disappear and find the unique shapes on your own.
Thank you. And I think there was another fun question in here from Grace. They say, in Lost Gods, one of my favorite characters was Ado. Have you ever considered doing a short story on him?
Boy, Lost Gods was such a, I put some books are about characters and some books are about the place. Lost Gods is about the place. I put so much time developing that world, and I really enjoyed that whole process. And I feel like I've built this set, and I would love to go back and revisit it and just, and that's part of what that world is. Every one of those gods and every one of those characters have a story, and I would love, I don't have enough time on this earth, but I would love to tell their stories. Yeah.
All right. So in 2010, you wrote the book The Child Thief, which is based on J.M. Barrie's fairy tale play Peter and Wendy. And in the play originally, Peter Pan helps the lost boys and remaining children, but quote, when they seem to be growing up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out, which give the implication that once they get old enough, Peter, gets rid of them. Later stories omit this, but Peter Pan thinning out the lost boys seems to have struck a nerve with you. How did you adapt that for the book The Child Thief?
Yeah, I mean, when I read the original Peter Pan, So many of us have grown up on the Disney version, but the original version, it's all hid under this fairy tale lyrical prose, but it's a dark story. It's basically a charismatic psychopath kidnapping kids, taking them to an island and teaching them to kill people. I mean, pirates are people, and it's teaching them how to slaughter them. There's a point in that story where they're having a body count on the ship, where they're, saying, I've killed 4, I've killed 6, I've slipped on so-and-so's entrails, it's like, whoa. So to me, that was so inspiring. It's like, well, I'd like to tell this in a gritty, visceral way from the perspective of the kid that was kidnapped and took to this island. So that was so inspiring. So much rich material to work with.
Yeah, and so you've noted that your older brother helped stir your interest in fantasy at a young age. So now that you're so successful, do you pay him royalties?
I probably should. No, I feel very fortunate to have an older brother that shared similar taste and interest, because he had access to things that I didn't. I could just walk into his room and there, were the John Carter of Mars, Frazetta covers and Conan covers by Frazetta. There was, Creepy and Eerie and all these horror novels and magazines and stuff. So it gave me a head start. It gave me exposure to stuff that I probably wouldn't have discovered until 3 or 4 years later. So feel very fortunate.
And so fantasy and science fiction art collector and scholar Arnie Fenner has written that your intent is not to frighten people, but to entertain them. Is that an accurate statement?
I think both of those are true, but more so, when I was a kid, I drew pictures and wrote words and got a stapler and put the notebook paper and made books, and I did that for my entertainment. This was for me. It was such a joy to make those. And that's what I'm doing today. I paint and I write and I'm making books. I'm doing it on the computer and on canvas now. But at the bottom line is I'm doing the stuff that I love, that scares me or interests me or turns me on and excites me. And so I make them for me first, and I just hope there's enough other warped people that share my, love of this stuff that they too will enjoy it.
I have a few more questions, if that's all right.
Sure.
About your concepts. And so somebody asked, if you were given full artistic vision and creative freedom direction with a real budget, what story, character, or any piece of work would you like to produce into a Netflix, HBO, or Amazon series?
Any of my own novels. The list would be miles long of all the stuff out there that I would love to see turned into movies and so forth. But if I was directing it, that would be the ultimate next step to fulfilling my vision, would be to take one of these novels and turn it into some sort of either a television show or movie. I love them all for different reasons. Some of them would lend themselves to series and some for movies.
Another related fun question is, did you enjoy working as a conceptual artist in movies? And what are some of your favorite monsters from the movies?
I did. As much as I love writing and illustrating these books, it can be a lonely process. When I was doing a lot of commercial art, I couldn't wait to just be in control of what I was doing. That's when I started writing. But too much of anything, you start to crave other stuff. And it's a lot of pressure when it's all on you. If it goes well, you get the accolades. If it goes bad, you don't have anybody to blame. So it's all on your shoulders. So it's nice to do collaborative work. It's part of the reason why I enjoy working for Blizzard Entertainment and Diablo so much. It's so nice to have that collaboration with other artists and writers and so forth. So as far as film work, from project to project, it varied. Probably the project that I'm most excited to have been part of was Galaxy Quest, because not only was the work fun and I worked with amazing other artists, but it's one of my favorite movies. So
Thank you. I know we're getting a little over time, but we do have another question from in person. What's up?
We can go as long as you guys want.
Thank you.
You kind of answered it indirectly, but who's like the most interesting or exciting person that he's gotten to work with through the course of his career?
They ask, Who is the most interesting or exciting person that you've gotten to work with through the course of your career?
Okay, this sounds silly. My son, he recently started, I'm talking about Diablo being a family affair. He recently started working as a game designer at Diablo. So he's currently working on Diablo 4 and so am I. So to me, that's just the very best, to work with your family on something that has been such a part of your family history.
Thank you. And I'll ask one more before giving it back, but I missed, somebody asked, I miss your workshop in Oregon. You did a few years back, I think with Ian McCaig. Are you going to be doing any more like that?
I don't have anything on the schedule at this time. Hopefully down the road somewhere, I'll be able to.
Right. Oh yeah, Brom, sorry. I talked to Tony DiGiulici this morning and he told me to tell you hi.
Oh, hi, Tony.
And really quickly, it looks like we'll be going to 6:30. So just so everybody knows if they want to send in any last minute questions or comments.
All right. And so how has the field of fantasy illustration changed since you began in the 1980s?
God, it's changed in so many ways. I think the biggest way it has changed is just in the how do I say this? But it's expanded in conceptually. We've had such a nice, wonderful, because of video games and because of the internet, we've had such a nice influx of voices and cultures from all over the world that are doing fantasy art. And as well as women have really entered the genre. And all these voices, they bring a fresh perspective. And I feel it has made the fantasy worlds more sophisticated. It has broadened it. It's brought in, again, fresh perspectives. It's always fascinating to me to see another culture, say some of the Chinese concept artists take traditional European fantasy and then translate it through their lens, and it's a fresh voice, So to me, that's the biggest difference, is we have all these new voices contributing to it and making it a far more interesting community, as well as actual art.
We've got a question going back to what we were talking about before. Do you have a favorite or preferred mythos or cultural folklore?
I mean, I have a lot of those. Probably Krampus is right at the top. I mean, basically a demon that takes naughty children and puts them in a sack and beats the crap out of them. I mean, how does it get better than that? So Krampus is a favorite, yes.
Yeah, we've
All right,
got
I
another
did have-
question here. Someone asks, what advice do you have for a 50-year-old who wants to get into fantasy game design?
Regardless of your age, you just pursue your passion. It's good to evaluate your capabilities and, compare it to other people that are working in the field. And if you feel, that you have what it takes, then go for it. I mean, I don't think age should matter. Yeah.
Right. And I just have one question, then I'll let Drew finish it up here. So as Frank Frazetta's paintings sell for millions of dollars now, it seems that fantasy art's becoming more mainstream. And I was wondering what you thought the future of fantasy art looks like in the field, but also with respect as a fine art.
Well, I'm very happy to see that fantasy art is finally getting some recognition, or getting a lot of recognition in the collectible art market. For years, I feel like we've kind of been at the bottom of that rung, but comics exploded many years ago, and that it hasn't been a bubble. It continues to be. And with the collector mentality of so many people that play these games, and also the fact that a lot of people that do play these games, they're often working in tech industry or in the gaming industry itself. So these are people that do have access to some disposable income. So I'm hopeful that it will continue. I'm not going to say it's been a hard living, but I do often feel like other genres of art seem to command, higher prices and respect in the collectible art community. So, of course, I'm thrilled to see that finally coming round to us. Yeah. So
We got a couple more good questions coming in. I'll start off with reading this comment. They say, this isn't a question, but a thank you, because without your work, I couldn't be in my current career. I'm an artist for Marvel and DC Comics and will be finishing up my very first oil painting for cover work this week. Your work is to me what Frazetta is to you. So thank you. From Megan.
well, congratulations, Megan, on getting those jobs. I'm thrilled to hear that, and thank you. That means the world to me.
Yes, that's from Megan Hetrick. And I just want to give a shout out to her forthcoming work. And she also asked a social media question. In 2021, do you feel any more or less pressure to have a social media presence for you, your art, or your books?
Yeah, I mean, social media has always been a two-edged sword to me. It can be toxic at times, but at the same time, I feel like I've made some really good friends through social media. I've found connections with people all over the world that share so many common interests. So I love it and I hate it at times, but it's also a necessity. It is where I promote and let people know what I'm doing. So, yeah.
Another social media question. Oh, whoops. They ask, how much effort do you put into your social media presence? And do you hire others to manage it, or is it all you?
I would love to hire somebody to do it, but I'm such a micromanager, that control freak, that I would probably drive them to tears. I need to put more effort into it. I really kind of hate the whole process of trying to get my art and post it and everything. It is always very rewarding, though, to get the feedback. But yeah, I have social media guilt. It's one more thing I need to be doing that I should be doing. Yeah.
And there's a great question. They say, thanks for sharing everything, Brom. As a freelance artist fresh out of college, I'm still trying to find my footing with how I approach my paintings, and it changes with every piece. What advice do you have on being pulled in different directions, and how long did it take for you to find your style?
That never ends. I feel like it was almost easier when I was younger. I recently got to a point where I took 2 years to basically paint whatever I wanted to. And it was funny. I suddenly was staring at a blank canvas going, oh, heck, what do I want to paint? I thought I had all these things. So it's a never ending issue. And I think it's very natural as creators to be pulled in a million directions. Because every time I see somebody do a nice painting, I'm like, oh, I want to do something like that. Or there's a show going on, I want to be part of that. So my answer is it never ends. But you do just have to buckle down and focus, I guess, at the end of the day. Yeah.
Thank you. We have a couple of related questions. Somebody asked, do you feel like your wife has influenced you or your art?
Yeah, I mean, I feel everybody around me has to some degree. But for those who don't know, my wife and I met in art school, and I'll tell you a real quick story is this was in the early 80s, and there weren't very many women interested in fantasy or comics or all that stuff. That was for us nerdy guys. I didn't have anything to do with it. And we went to a 2-year art school, and I bumped into her, and we were going out to eat, a group of us. And I said, well, what about her? Let's invite her. And the other girl said, don't invite her. She's weird. And so I was smitten, like, oh, there's a weird girl that likes fantasy and comics and stuff. So, I basically at the end of the 2 weeks when her parents came, I was 17 and I think she was 18. I went right up to him and I said, I'm going to marry your daughter one day. And I went away to Germany for 2 years. And when I came back, we hooked up in Atlanta and we've been together ever since. But to get back to what your question was, she went to Parsons in art school, and I feel she was, far ahead of me art-wise at that time. I've learned a lot from her as far as, just just, a more sophisticated approach to painting. I was doing airbrush stuff, and, she knew a lot about oils and things, but she put all that art aside while she raised the kids, and she started painting again when she was in her 40s. And what was fascinating to me is she didn't paint for almost 20 years, but I was so impressed with how much growth had happened even without painting. I mean, I don't even understand that. But it was great to see her learning curve, but she has found her own voice. And yeah, I hopefully we inspire each other. We both work in the studios together, though there's a wall and a door, because she says I jibber jabber too much. I don't know what she could possibly mean by that, but yeah, she's definitely a muse.
Thank you. And this looks like the last question, unless anybody in the audience has any, or anything else from the online audience, but they ask, what are your newest inspirations? Any recent sparks for new research?
Oh, God, there's so many. This is one of these questions I can't think of something off the top of my head. I'm starting a new book, and it just delves into the whole question of what is evil. I'm always, in all my stories, I tend to focus on what is traditionally the evil character, whether it's Krampus or some demon, and what makes them evil from their perspective. Where humans are just food, or we're invading their territory and stuff. So that always fascinates me. So this focuses on a demon who basically possesses people, and from his perspective, he's not evil. And it's been a fascinating exploring that whole concept of evil. So
Thank you. And real quick, another one, last one just came in from Ian. Any stories behind those sculptures on the table behind you? They look interesting.
oh gosh, well, the red devil is an ugly jug, and that's a folk tradition down in South Carolina, in the South. Being from the South, I'm very intrigued by all the Southern folk tales and stuff. And there's a lot of potters who do that, but a couple in particular are very famous. So that's probably the most interesting piece there. Ugly jug, called ugly jug.
Thank you. Jesse, did you have anything else you wanted to say before we close out?
No. So what year is your new book set in?
1666.
Okay, that was it. Well, thank you, Brom.
Thank you. Thank everybody. This is, it's very nice of you guys to indulge me. And again, such an honor to be part of the Norman Rockwell Museum.
Thank you, Brom, for talking with us. It's been a pleasure working with you and having you on here. I also want to thank everybody who came out today and made it a great discussion. Really was fantastic. Had a lot of contributions. And really quickly, I just want to thank Jesse for everything you've done. I know you've contributed a lot with the curation and helping with the questions and everything. So again, just thank you all. I think this has been really perfect. And unless anybody has anything else to say, we'll go ahead and wrap it up. I've been Drew Dragonslayer Thomas, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your night.